In Magic the Gathering, uncommons aren't usually very expensive. After all, it's the second lowest rarity in the game, and booster packs tend to have multiples of them. However, there are some uncommons out there that are in such high demand and or in such low supply that they still have a pretty high price tag, despite the fact that they don't have a higher rarity. I've done top 10s on the most expensive uncommons in white, blue, black, and red, and in this video we're completing the cycle, as I will take a look at Magic's 10 most expensive green uncommons, and I'll also explain what makes them so expensive. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you want Magic singles or sealed product, use my link in the description. Before we get to the list, let me discuss the methodology of this video. The prizes in it are Card Kingdom near mint prices, and they are the price for the cheapest tournament legal printing of a card. In other words, something like Alpha Regrowth isn't going to appear here. Sure, it's an uncommon that's worth $350, but you can also get your hands on a tournament legal near mint printing of it for 79 cents. In other words, the prices in this video are the least amount you can pay for a near mint copy of the card, regardless of the printing. Furthermore, a card had to be an uncommon in its original printing to be eligible for the list. Alright, with that out of the way, let's look at the 10 most expensive green uncommons, starting with Bala Ged Recovery, which costs about $9.50. For 2 generic and a green, it's a sorcery that can return target card from your graveyard to your hand. That's not the most exciting card. I mean, Regrowth does the same thing for 1 less mana. But there's one big upside Recovery has. It's a modal double-face card, and on its other side, it's a land called Bala Ged Sanctuary, which enters tapped and can tap for green mana. Modal double-face cards can be played as either side, and that's great because it makes this card good whether you're flooding out or mana screwed, and being able to get your best card back from the graveyard is definitely nice in the later stages of the game. This makes the cost of running this card incredibly low, and has resulted in it being very heavily played ever since being printed in 2020. While in Standard it was featured in all manner of green decks, in Pioneer it's regularly appeared in Lotus Field decks since 2020. In those decks, it isn't just a generically good card, it's actually a key part of the deck. These decks look to win the game by producing absurd mana with the field, which is accomplished by untapping it multiple times a turn. Then Omniscience eventually comes into play, at which point you can use Bala Ged Recovery to get whatever you need back from the graveyard for no mana and cast it for free too. For example, some versions of the deck use Chandra Hope's Beacon, a planeswalker that has a -X ability that can damage your opponent. She also copies your instants and sorceries. This means that if you have some mix of 3 recoveries in your graveyard and your hand, you can play Chandra, cast Bala Ged Recovery to get recovery back and something else, and then do -X to do 5 to the opponent. Then you cast another recovery from your hand to get back Chandra and a recovery, and you rinse and repeat from there. Like all modal double-face cards, it also sees play in decks that can take advantage of its very nature as a modal double-face card. That's because while it's in your deck, Bala Ged Recovery isn't considered a land, so effects that check for lands don't see it as one. This means that it's been used in both Pioneer and Modern in landless spy decks. These decks run only modal double-face cards as their lands, and that means when Balustrade Spy enters or you use Undercity Informer's activated ability, your entire deck gets milled, and then the deck can win the game in a variety of ways. Similarly, it's been played in Modern Goblin Charbelcher decks. The Belcher's activated ability reveals cards until you hit a land and then does damage to the opponent equal to the number of revealed cards, and in that deck, the whole deck is revealed and the opponent is killed with a single activation. It's also worth noting that unlike most lands, you can exile Bala Ged Recovery from your hand to cast Endurance for free. Bala Ged Recovery is still seeing regular play in Pioneer right now and occasional play in Modern, and its demand in Commander is also through the roof, as it's pretty close to being a staple in green decks, since simply having a land that can also be a spell is some amazing modality, and its recursive nature even allows for some combos. As a result, Bala Ged Recovery sees play in 250,000 of the decks in EDH Rec. Throw in the fact that the card has only ever been printed a single time in a regular set, back in 2020, and you have a small supply of a card that's in high demand among players of both 60-card and 100-card formats. At number 9, it's Thermokarst, which costs about $10. For 1 generic and 2 green, it's a sorcery that destroys a land, and if it was a snow land, you gain 1 life. 3-mana land destruction spells tend to play pretty well, especially in green, because if you drop a mana dork on turn 1 and this on turn 2, you've built yourself an impressive mana advantage while simultaneously setting your opponent back. Unsurprisingly, it was played in extended land destruction decks back in the late 1990s. Obviously, what a card did in the 1990s doesn't usually have a very big impact on its current price, but Thermokarst is currently in demand among today's Pauper players, with Pauper being a format where only commons are legal. It's played there in land destruction decks like Panza, but also appears in Elves and Gruul aggro decks. Pauper's a format where the Tron lands are incredibly strong, as are Snow lands and Utopia Sprawl, and Thermokarst does a good job of dealing with all of those things. Players of the pre-modern format, an unofficial but popular format that includes cards printed only between 1995 and 2003, are also after Thermokarst. Thermokarst's demand in Commander is almost nothing, but popularity in Pauper and pre-modern is more than enough to drive up a card's price when it only has a single printing, one that came way back in 1995. Notably, Thermokarst is a card that could be reprinted. Although Wizards doesn't like printing 3-mana land destruction spells in standard legal formats, it's not out of the question that Thermokarst appears in something like a theoretical Modern Horizons 4, at which point the price would likely drop significantly. At number 8, it's Psychotrope Thallid. For 2 generic and a green, it's a 1/1, and at the beginning of your upkeep you put a spore counter on it. You can remove 3 spore counters from it to make a 1/1 Saproling, and you can also pay 1 generic and sacrifice a Saproling to draw a card. So if you have all the time in the world, or a way to multiply counters, Psychotrope Thallid is a pretty absurd value engine, as being able to turn out Saprolings that you can also use to draw cards is a powerful thing. While the Thallid has never been played in 60-card formats, there is some moderate demand for it in Commander. Fungi and their Saproling friends are incredibly popular in the format, and the Thallid is simultaneously one of the best Saproling producers and one of the best Saproling payoffs around. Shrewfus, Slimefoot, and the Myco Tyrant are all very popular commanders that can get a lot out of Psychotrope Thallid. The Thallid also sees play in decks that aren't as focused on the Saproling and Fungus angle, but instead can multiply counters effectively. For example, alongside Vorel of the Hulklade, things can get pretty crazy. All of that said, while there's certainly demand for the Thallid in Commander, it's not exactly through the roof. But like many of the cards on the list, the supply of Psychotrope Thallid is incredibly limited. It's only been printed a single time, in 2007's Planar Chaos, and there are enough players interested in what the Thallid has to offer that the supply of the card is stretched very thin. At number 7, it's Sylvan Paradise, which costs about $15. For 1 green mana, it's an instant that makes 1 or more target creatures become green until end of turn. This card is part of a cycle in Legends, all of which do the same thing. They're all 1 mana of a color, and can turn any number of target creatures into that color until end of turn. While that's not the most inspired design ever for a cycle, all of the cards in it are among the priciest uncommons in the game, and we've seen some of the other cards in this cycle appear on their color's respective list. It's not because the card is in super high demand. It isn't. It's only in around 200 decks in all of EDHREC, and it's also not played, nor has it ever been played in 60-card formats. However, what this card does is inherently strong. The cards in this cycle are the only 1-mana cards in the game that can just target every single creature on the battlefield that you want them to. That in and of itself isn't super notable, but if you can combine Sylvan Paradise with payoffs for targeting things, you can generate insane value for only a single mana. While some of the other cards in this cycle have ready-made commanders for them, like playing the black one in a Hirobi deck, where it becomes a 1-mana one-sided Wrath, Sylvan Paradise doesn't currently really have a home. It did briefly work really well in Nadu decks, where you could target all of your creatures and get Nadu's trigger for every single one of them, but then the card got banned. But Wizards has been really interested in printing cards that pay you off for targeting things of late, and it's really only a matter of time before there's another commander that can abuse Sylvan Paradise, at which point its price is likely to go up even higher, since the 1994 printing of the card is the only one out there. At number 6, it's Powerleech, which costs about $19. For 2 green mana, it's an enchantment, and whenever an artifact an opponent controls becomes tapped, or an opponent activates an artifact's ability without a tap symbol in its activation cost, you gain 1 life. This is not a particularly good card, nor was it ever. While hating on artifacts with free abilities can be nice, gaining 1 life at a time isn't exactly impressive, especially when you only get the trigger with very particular abilities. As such, Powerleech has never top 8'd anything, nor is it heavily played in Commander. So it's kind of like Sylvan Paradise, but it also isn't even a potentially powerful card like Sylvan Paradise is primed to be, and it's not an especially unique effect either. So, how does this mediocre card cost almost $20? 2 words: reserved list. This is a list of cards that Wizards of the Coast has promised never to reprint, and it includes all the uncommons and antiquities that weren't reprinted in Revised 4th Edition or Chronicles, and Powerleech is one of those. That means that all of the copies of this card that will ever exist already do, and because the card isn't all that great, it's largely collectors who want to own Magic cards for the sake of owning them, who drive the price up on this card that has probably been cast very few times in the history of Magic. At number 5, it's Triumph of the Hordes, which costs about $21. For 2 generic and 2 green, it's a sorcery that gives +1/+1 trample and infect to all of your creatures until end of turn. A mass pump spell that grants trample is pretty nasty alongside infect, because infect creatures do damage to opponents in the form of poison counters, and if an opponent gets 10 of those, they lose the game on the spot. This means that if you have a sizable board, or maybe even just one huge creature, Triumph of the Hordes can one-shot an opponent. Despite the fact that infect decks are very much a thing in competitive formats like Modern and Legacy, Triumph of the Hordes has never put up a top 8. This is because it doesn't actually work with the game plan of actual infect decks, which generally look to stick one really cheap creature that already has infect, and then buff it and protect it for long enough to kill the opponent, which those decks can often achieve in 1 or 2 swings, and well before they've spent 4 mana. However, Triumph of the Hordes does have a very high demand among Commander players, as it's a good fit in any kind of deck that's good at building out insane boards like Elf or Token decks, which can turn Triumph into a legitimate win condition, sometimes one that allows them to kill multiple players at once. After all, you've got a board full of trampling elves that can absolutely do 10 damage to more than one player. It's also the kind of card where the price tag itself prevents people from playing it to a degree, as spending $21 on an uncommon isn't super palatable to everyone, and if this was like a $1 card, I can guarantee it would be in a lot more decks. So that significant demand in Commander, coupled with the fact that the Triumph has only been reprinted in very limited releases, like a dual deck and a secret lair, means that the demand for Triumph of the Hordes is generally greater than the supply. I just told you about how expensive Triumph of the Hordes is. Now let me tell you a triumph you can help me achieve for free: getting to 100,000 subscribers. I'm closing in on that major milestone, and I'd really appreciate your help in getting me there. At number 4, it's Constant Mists, which costs about $22. For 1 generic and a green, it's an instant that prevents all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. It also comes with buyback, sacrifice a land. That means that when you cast it, you can pay that cost, and if you do, Constant Mist returns to your hand when it resolves. Yeah, this is basically a 1-card fog engine that you can use to drive your opponents absolutely insane. Sure, the sacrificing land thing is a cost, but it's often well worth making sure you can fog anytime someone attacks you. The very threat of doing that will often make your opponents unwilling to attack you in the first place, so it's the kind of card that does something even when you don't cast it. While it saw a little bit of play in the Standard of the 1990s, it hasn't seen significant play in any 60-card format since then. However, Turbo Fog is a fairly popular Commander archetype, and these are decks that look to fog every turn while building up an advantage in drawing cards. If you're drawing cards, it's pretty easy to have the lands to sacrifice. Constant Miss is also used in any land-based Commander deck, since it can give you a powerful and easy way to sacrifice lands for value. For example, Lord Windgrace can bring the lands back that you sacrifice, and the Gitrog monster and Titania give you card draw and token generation respectively anytime you sacrifice a land. This has led to significant demand for Constant Mists in Commander, and at this point it probably won't surprise you to hear that this card has basically never been reprinted. If you want to get your hands on a tournament legal copy, the only one out there apart from the Stronghold version is from a secret lair. At number 3, it's Worldly Tutor, which costs about $25. It's 1 green mana for an instant that searches up a creature card and puts it on top of your library. While tutoring something to the top of your library is way worse than putting it into your hand, Worldly Tutor makes up for its inherent card disadvantage by being incredibly cheap and an instant. As such, if you're playing any kind of deck in any format it's legal in that is reliant on creatures, especially particular ones, you definitely want to be jamming Worldly Tutor. In 60-card formats, it's been the most effective in creature-based combo decks, like extended decks which could combo off in a number of different ways using creatures. Central to this plan were either Daru Spiritualist or Cephalid Illusionist. If you had another creature like Nomads and Core around, you could use its activated ability to target either of them as many times as you wanted. This would send Daru Spiritualist's toughness through the roof, and then you could gain a billion life with Starlit Sanctum. If you targeted the Illusion, you could mill your whole deck and then reanimate a lethal Sutured Ghoul. It's also been played in legacy versions of Cephalid Combo as well as Reanimator decks, which like to tutor something to the top and then mill it into the graveyard. While all of that means there is certainly demand for Worldly Tutor in 60 card formats, it's Commander that is the major driving force of this card's price tag. It appears in almost 400,000 decks on EDHREC. Tutors are at their strongest in a singleton format, as they help reduce the variance of your deck while also helping you grab a creature that is ideal for a given moment. The power of the Tutor in the format is perhaps best expressed by the fact that Worldly Tutor is on the Game Changers list, meaning that Worldly Tutor can only appear in decks that are in one of the format's higher brackets, which basically signify the power level of decks. Basically, Worldly Tutor is the kind of card that should be in virtually any green commander deck that's interested in being as powerful as possible, as spending 1 mana on a tutor is an incredible deal, and that's never really going to change. When you consider all of that, alongside the fact that Worldly Tutor has only ever been reprinted in one standard release set, and that was Classic 6th edition in 1999, other than that, it's only been reprinted in premium products like Commander Collection Green and at Rare in Dominaria Remastered, so it makes a lot of sense that Worldly Tutor is so expensive. At number 2, it's Sylvan Library, which costs about $28. For 1 generic and a green, it's an enchantment, and at the beginning of your draw step, you can draw 2 additional cards. If you do, you choose 2 cards in your hand that you drew this turn, and for each of them, you can pay 4 life or put that card on top of your library. Drawing 2 extra cards a turn is absolutely insane for a 2-mana enchantment, and while you have to pay 8 total life to hold on to both of those cards, the fact that this is as modal as it is pretty sweet. You can just use it for card selection and not pay any life, in which case you get to hold on to the 2 best cards in your top 3, or you can hold on to one of the cards that you drew and pay 4, and then of course there's the 8 life option. None of those are bad choices, and the library gets especially nasty in decks that plan on winning so quickly that they don't really care about losing all that life. It found some success in both standard and extended during its early days, but Legacy is where it's truly taken off. It shows up in virtually all green decks in the format, whether they're aggressive like Zoo or combo decks like Lands. It's perhaps at its most powerful in Legacy Death's Shadow, where having the option to pay 8 life a turn probably means you can kill the opponent in a swing or two with the deck's eponymous avatar. While it's not quite as prolific in Vintage, it sees play there too, since that's a format where games are usually over in very few turns, making the cost of paying all that life well worth it, especially when all you really need to do is find your Oath of Druids to win the game on the spot. In addition to being in high demand among those who play the Eternal formats, the library is also in incredibly high demand in Commander. It's pretty much the best green card draw engine ever, and should appear in almost any green Commander deck, and it probably would if it weren't so challenging to get your hands on. Believe it or not, the library used to be even more expensive, but it's been reprinted enough, albeit in non-standard release sets, to drive the price down, thanks to sets like Eternal Masters and Dominaria Remastered. So you should actually be thankful that the library will only set you back $28. And at number 1, I've got 2 cards, and that's because they would have been number 1 and number 2 if they each had their own slot, and they're both from the same set, Portal 3 Kingdoms. These cards are the $48 Zodiac Horse and the $38 Zodiac Tiger. We see cards from this strange set appear on many top 10s about the most expensive cards in the game, and it's typically the case that it's almost entirely a result of how rare these cards are, and doesn't have anything to do with their value as game pieces. Portal 3 Kingdoms was released in Asian markets as a standalone beginner version of Magic. They made the game a lot easier to understand by limiting the number of card types and adding a sword and shield to creatures so that you could more easily remember which was power and which was toughness. Portal 3 Kingdoms and other Portal sets weren't even legal in any Magic format until 2005, when cards from it finally became legal in Legacy and Vintage. Zodiac Horse is 3 generic and a green for a 3/3 with Island Walk for some reason, and Zodiac Tiger is 2 generic and 2 green for a 3/4 with Forest Walk. Obviously, neither of these creatures are very impressive or interesting, nor have they ever been. However, they do both have popular creature types and great art, and that certainly helps drive the price even higher than rarity alone. So, those are Magic's most expensive green uncommons. If you want to own any of them, because some of them are well worth the cost, check out the description, where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card in the video. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at the most expensive cards in the game, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.